Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this EU Sustainable Energy Days event. This webinar is being co-organized by Cleaner Task Force and CCS Europe. I'm Selina Zender, the head of the Secretariat of CCS Europe, and I'll be leading you through this exciting webinar today. I also have the pleasure to introduce our esteemed set of panelists that will join us for this discussion on the role of electrification and carbon capture in decarbonizing industry. First, we are joined by Stefanie Hiesinger. She leads the unit for low carbon solutions at the European Commission's Director General for Climate Action. She plays a key role in shaping EU policy on clean technologies, including hydrogen, but also industrial decarbonization. And her team is currently involved in developing the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. Further, I have the pleasure to introduce Kristin Karlstad. She's Vice President of Sustainability at Norsk Hydro, where she leads efforts to decarbonize aluminium production through renewable energy, recycling, and also carbon capture. She is also the Vice Chair Industry of the CCS Europe advocacy body. Then further, we have Marcus Fischer joining us. He is senior regulatory advisor at Ørsted, and he represents the company in Brussels and co-shapes European net zero policy making. And last but not least, we have Cody Ross. He's European policy manager for carbon capture at the Clean Air Task Force. Cleaner Task Force. At Clean Air Task Force, he leads the work to develop policies that support the deployment of carbon capture, removal and storage technologies across Europe. Thank you all for being here today. Before we start this webinar, just a few housekeeping also for the audience out there. This webinar will last about 1 hour. We'll start first with a panel discussion and then have a Q&A to which you also can submit questions. You'll see the button at the bottom of your window. Please do ask questions and happy to go through them at the end of the webinar. And to kick off our discussion today, we wanted to actually hear from our audience as well in terms of what are the technological solutions we need to deploy to decarbonize hard-to-abate industries like cement, aluminium, and lime. We will have a poll to which you can be submitting your questions to us as well. My colleague should launch it exactly. It just popped up. Should launch it shortly. We'll, of course, then come back to that poll later onwards and see also the reactions from your side. Starting off with the panel discussion and more kind of the complementary role of electrification CCS, I first wanted to start off with a system view and address myself first to Cody. Cody, you are a carbon capture manager, policy manager at Cleaner Task Force, who's an international non-profit organization. You're working on safeguarding the worst impacts of climate change by catalyzing rapid development of low carbon energy and other climate protective technologies. Cleaner Task Force is doing quite a lot of research and studies. So I'm wondering, Cody, is there an optimal combination of different technologies that we should strive for when we're looking at decarbonizing industry?
Yes, thank you, Selena, and thank you very much for coming in to chair this. When we're looking at the question of what kind of is the optimal portfolio of technologies, I mean, at Clean Air Task Force, we've been working on a lot of technologies across our areas. I work on carbon capture, but we also work on hydrogen, fusion, nuclear, transport decarbonization, electrification. So we do have a good sense of all of the different technologies that are available. But I do think when it comes to decarbonizing European industry, there is really no one size or one technology that's going to get us to our climate goals. And that's specifically due to the fact that we have different industries. And different industries have different needs. For example, if we look at the cement industry and lime industry, the process emissions that are inherent to producing their products mean that regardless of the energy efficiency changes that you do, and regardless of the any electrification, it's not going to get us the entire way to net zero for that sector. So really, there's a need to look at how do these different technologies complement each other. And how can we look at it in a systematic way with our industrial clusters? Because we're going to have different industries which are clustered together, and these different industries will have different decarbonization pathways. These even different decarbonization pathways will also differ based on region. For example, some regions are going to have more access to cheaper electricity, cheaper renewable electricity, which can lower the costs of electrification. Some of these countries also and industries within them are going to have access to lower cost green hydrogen or clean hydrogen, which will also change the kind of the portfolio of technologies they need. But overall, what the research and science kind of shows us is that if you bet all of your chips on one technology, you're either going to have a more costly route to net zero. And you're likely also to have a riskier approach too, because if we put all of those chips onto one technology, and if that technology doesn't develop at the speed or scale necessary or hits roadblocks, well then, you've kind of overinvested into that one area. So I do think that we need to think about it systemically. A lot of these industries are plugging into a grid. We need also thinking about how do we decarbonize the grid? How do we increase this energy transport infrastructure so that we're actually able to um, get this clean electricity to where it's most needed? And we need to have a cost efficiency lens as well for all of this. I mean, the energy transition is going to be expensive. Obviously not in terms of the overall net savings it delivers compared to doing nothing, but we do need to think about where we most efficiently deploy these different technologies and the financial resources by which we want to actually scale them up.
Thank you, Cody. Very interesting. And I think you just shared the view from the research side. And I'm just wondering, Stephanie, can you maybe just share with us the view from the Commission? How do you see the role of electricity, but also CCS in decarbonizing the industry?
Yes, thank you, Selina, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, I think Cody said, many things to which we also can fully subscribe. In particular, when he said that there's no one size fits all. So heavy industry is really crucial in our efforts to decarbonize our economy. And that's why we need to find solutions that work, but also that work in a cost-effective way. And so we have indeed, there's electrification as one pathway that, we already incentivize, not least through the EU emissions trading system, but we still see that, the incentives are not yet there. We do not see this happening at the scale needed. And that's why, for example, from the Innovation Fund, which my team is managing here in the Commission, we will organize, following the Clean Industrial Deal this year, a pilot for the Industrial Decarbonization Bank. And that pilot is going to be a fixed premium auction for electrifying industrial heat processes. So this is like one step into that direction to further support electrification in industrial processes. And then, of course, carbon capture and storage, it's then basically the next step when we talk about hard to abate emissions in certain sectors. And hard to abate can either be process emissions, and there's no other way than, emitting at the end of the process, or the emission reductions are simply too costly, so to say, to instill them through the carbon price and other means. And that's why they, in the end, need then to be captured and stored. And that is a pathway that we pursue in particular through the industrial carbon management strategy that we adopted last year. And there are different building blocks that we are currently working on, not least also to get the infrastructure for these projects on the way, but also identifying the capture plants, identifying the storage sites. So all of this needs to happen basically in parallel. And that's why I think what you said in your introduction is really crucial. These are complementary ways of achieving the same goal, which is decarbonizing our economy and reaching climate neutrality by 2050.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can I just ask a follow-up questions? How do you ensure that these different pathways are actually really in synergy and not in competition as we sometimes just hear it outside?
Yeah, I mean that's of course the challenge, as in life in general, to ensure coherence and consistency, and in particular when it comes to policy making and different interests at play. I think, well, the what I explained, the bedrock of our policies is the EU ETS. This is a market-based instrument defining the most cost-effective way, and starting from that, we of course, look at the solutions that are out there. The Innovation Fund is very much known as an instrument that also is built, from the bottom up, so to say, where we are in close cooperation and exchange with industries about what is actually happening out there in research applications, but also in industry itself. What is the thinking? So I think that is really needed if you want to make these policies work in sync. And well, of course, that it's really a huge challenge to make a policy or to design a policy framework that is always mutually supportive. I will not hide that, but I think so far we are on a good track with the mix of instruments that we are devising, and also the right level of transparency that is actually also really needed if you want, for example, for CCS to create a market. In the end, we want to create a market for CO2, so we need to also instill a level of transparency, being on where are the storage capacities, but also on the price, on the abatement costs. We also see that in the hydrogen auction that we're having, where there was no transparency until we did the first auction for renewable hydrogen in the EU under the Innovation Fund from the European Hydrogen Bank. So now at least we have an indicator about what price are we actually talking when it comes to the production of renewable hydrogen in the EU. So it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm just wondering, going now towards more the industry, Marcus. Ørsted is a Danish company present across Europe. You're mainly really known for renewable energy, but also primarily for your focus on offshore wind deployment. Ørsted sees itself as an enabler for companies to transition to green energy and decarbonize. And in recent years, the company has also expanded towards carbon capture and storage technologies, and it's part of the strategy to really achieve net zero emissions. How come? Can you elaborate a bit more, Marcus?
Yes, I'm happy to elaborate on that and how Ørsted transformed from being a fossil fuel intensive company towards where we are today, and how CCS plays in there. But if I may ask for a little bit of patience until I get there, I'd have just one more general comment on the electrification in general, if that's okay. And then perhaps I can explain that Ørsted transformation later. But everything that you said is correct. Because I just like, to point to the current situation, which is, I think, always the starting point. So 98% of oil in the European Union is imported, and 90% of gas is imported. These are Eurostat figures from 2022, but they haven't changed much. In 2022, according to the Action Plan on Affordable Energy Communication, this came at a cost of over 600 billion euros. And it's not only the high cost, it's also a fundamental security concern. 20% of global oil and 20% of LNG are shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. And geopolitical developments in the Middle East, they yet again underpin that Europe faces a very risky reliance on foreign oil and gas. So in the European Union, not speaking for, I guess, locations outside, but within the industrial sector accounts for roughly 1/4 of total gas consumption and around 15% of oil consumption. So electrification of industry comes also with very strong security benefits in addition to climate benefits. And electrification, based on domestic resources like wind, water, and sun, they bring energy efficiency as well, and they are based on so we need less foreign energy, and we can make our own energy quite easily with electrification. So this will substantially reduce the risks of our industry having to deal with yet another energy crisis. So just from the situation where we are today, highly dependent on imported fossil fuels in a very risky geopolitical situation, the foundation for competitive manufacturing and production in Europe is switching to domestic sources, and part of that is electrification. But there's a big but. So I don't want to fully contest what has been said. So with that over to you, let me focus on CCS just very briefly and why it is important. So I've mentioned the electrification, and there's some studies that say 90% of processes can be electrified directly by 2035. We also currently use gas for things such as milk powder drying, low temperature heat. And I think here there's a very good case that these can be electrified with heat pumps and e-boilers. So low temperature heat, mid temperature heat, where currently fossil gas is in use. But it won't solve, as Cody has said, and as I think Stephanie also alluded to, it won't solve every problem. And that's where other solutions come in, hydrogen and certainly also CCS. And I think we've already talked about process emissions. We've mentioned the cement sector, for example, and a few other sectors. So low mid-temperature heat, electrification seems to be a good way forward. By and large, of course, there's exemptions as well. But the more you go into process and high temperature CCS will play a crucial role. And that's at least the understanding of when I talk to people and analysts of today. And having said that, let me make one very last point on why CCS is important in addition to its industrial application, which is negative emissions and carbon dioxide removal, which of course can be enabled through DECs or BECs with CCS. And this is coming now to Ørsted. What we are doing, we have sustainable bioenergy plants, and they are close to carbon neutral. As opposed to coal, sustainable biomass releases only the emissions that have been taken out of the atmosphere over the last years and decades. And if you then equip these bioenergy plants with CCS, you create negative emissions or carbon dioxide removal. And this is a very versatile technology, CDR, because it can counterbalance remaining emissions in the system. And here perhaps just one last thought, why this could be relevant for industry. Because industry often faces very complex emission sources. I think you could call them niche but stubborn, right? Industrial processes, very bespoke solutions, hard to abate, and responsible only for a tiny, tiny share of global emissions. Something like specialty fluorochemical feedstock production as a PTFE precursor in the chemical industry. It's a very complex, hazardous process requiring high purity reagents, intense heat, chemically intrinsic emissions, so process emissions. And decarbonizing this process is challenging due to the molecular nature of the emissions. It's a process emission. And it's also just a few megatons of CO2 equivalent annually. So some mitigation strategies might exist, even though they're perhaps still in the lab. But the question is, why not use a versatile technology such as CCS or CCS-enabled CDR for such solutions? Just as a thought out there, not saying this is a fully fledged position from us, but just as a thought out there, sometimes CDR can be, carbon dioxide removal can be very versatile for these niche but stubborn sectors that are responsible for a very tiny share of global emissions, but all have their bespoke solutions, their bespoke processes. So to summarize, electrification is critical, and I just wanted to re-emphasize on that, to decarbonize industry. But of course, it is not enough by itself. There are sectors and applications where CCS-based solutions make a lot of sense as well.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a very good point. And I'd like to hear also Kristin's point of view here. Norsk Hydro has set itself targets for to produce low and close to zero materials products by 2025 and 2030, if I'm correctly, Kristin. And you want to achieve ultimately net zero emissions by 2050 or earlier if possible. Let's remember also aluminium production is a hard to abate sector. How is it going? And are you on track with decarbonizing, Kristin?
Boldly, I will say yes, we are on track. We have a very clear roadmap. We know what we're doing, and we have a clear roadmap to attack all the emissions throughout our supply chain. And of course, we have to tackle all these emissions, all the scopes, to actually be net zero by 2050. And Hydro is an aluminium and renewable energy company. So as both a large electricity consumer and a large electricity producer, we sort of have a unique view and also unique opportunity in this space in decarbonization and electrification. However, we've already reduced our emissions by 55% since 1990, and we have increased production in that time. So that means that the footprint of our aluminium has actually reduced by over 75%. So what remains is not just hard to abate, it's really, really hard to abate. And we're going to have to rely on some really advanced technological solutions, and we are going to have some technological breakthroughs to be able to get further down. And also another point is that the electricity that we use and the energy that we use is over 90% renewable already. So electrification has been mainly done, but yes, I agree here with Marcus. There are some niche emissions that we could probably electrify, but they are very, very small in the overall picture, and they would require some technologies. So maybe CDRs is the way to go to tackle these residuals at the end of the day before 2050. However, to answer your question, yeah, we are on track.
Okay. And how is it, because you're also planning to apply CCS, and what role of CCS do you see in kind of really decarbonizing now the different tracks that the really hard to abate part of the emissions that you still need to eliminate?
Yes, so as I said, our process is very electrified. So the process emissions is obviously a chemical reaction that we cannot avoid. We are looking at ways to develop completely new technology to not have the same chemical reaction, but it's been the same technology since 1884, and no one has come up with a better solution. So we're working on it. But in the meantime, we have 6 large aluminium smelters in Europe, and we need to do something to decarbonize those. And CCS turns out to be the most promising option. However, it's also difficult because our off-gas is not like other industrial off-gases. There's only 1% CO2 in the off-gas. So it's not off-the-shelf technology. We cannot use the same as Longship, which is opening today. We cannot use the same technology as cement, for example, or other industrial processes where they typically have 20% or 30%, or even in the coal-fired power plants where they have about 4% CO2 in the off-gas. We need to almost work on direct air capture like technologies to come up with something that works in our industrial processes. And that's what we're doing. We're working on a portfolio of technologies to come up with the best one for aluminium production. But it's going to be a long way, and we're going to need support both from the Innovation Fund and other regulations to be able to succeed.
Thank you. And may I just ask a follow-up question on that, is in terms of you still have a long way in front of you. What are the main challenges that you see? Because you're with a technology which still is, you need to develop it. What are the main challenges for you at the moment?
Well, as I said, we have a low concentration in the off-gas, so that means that we need to really develop technology that is now on a very low technology readiness level. But at the same time, we need to work on the framework for the infrastructure and for the storage. We need to know that there is a market for CO2 when we get there, and the market needs to have a cost that we can live with, because everyone's talking as if everyone's going to earn so much money on this CO2 market. But the only money in this system is our avoided ETS cost. That's the only thing we can pay, is to avoid the ETS cost, really. So let's be realistic when it comes to this market. The other thing I would like to say is that there needs to be someone willing to pay for our low carbon products. And I put a lot of hope in the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act to be able to create a paying market for those products, because otherwise there will not be a way for us to finance this.
Thank you. We'll come to the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act shortly. Before that, I just wanted to also give a bit more the floor to Marcus, because actually Ørsted is working on Denmark's first carbon capture project. They're a bit in a different situation. Your carbon capture project will already be operational next year. What were the deciding factors for you to take the FID and to deploy CCS on your combined heat and power plant?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I'll also now, I didn't really answer your first question before, so also let me take that. So Ørsted is known for its transformation, right, from black to green. You asked me before, why does Ørsted do CCS? Rightfully, you said we're known for offshore wind. We're actually the largest developer for offshore wind. Back in the year 2008, Ørsted was called DONG, Danish Oil and Natural Gas. It was one of the most fossil fuel intensive companies in Europe. And back then, a vision was created back then 85% of assets of the portfolio were fossil and 15 were renewable. And the goal was to switch that 85-15 to 15-85. So 15% fossil and 85% renewables within a generation. The company invested in offshore wind to achieve that. But very importantly, and often forgotten, also converted coal-fired power plants to bioenergy, to sustainable biomass. These are, bioenergy combined heat and power plants. They are close to carbon neutrality already. As mentioned before, the tree absorbs within the lifetime. And then when the combustion happens, not of the tree, but only of the bad parts of the wood that can't be used anywhere else, such as rotten branches, that CO2 is released again. And that thanks to that, and thanks to investments in offshore wind, solar, and so on, we have actually achieved that not 85% renewables, but 98% renewables already 10 to 15 years after the vision was set, and reduced our CO2 emissions in terms of grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour by 96%. In 2024, the last coal power plant was shut down. And as mentioned, many of these coal plants either were retired or converted to sustainable biomass. They also used to, supply 400,000 Danish households with heating. And now the next step comes. What do we do with our sustainable biomass fleet? Negative emissions, carbon dioxide removal. If we equip them with CO2, then we have the biogenic CO2 that we can store permanently, and that will create negative emissions. So if the last 10 to 15 years we're getting from emissions heavy to emissions neutral, from coal to sustainable biomass, the next journey will be to get from carbon neutral to carbon negative. And this is where CCS is crucial. But we're also active in the wider CCS space. Perhaps just one quick thing at the project, if I may. So there's this Kalundborg CO2 hub, Europe's first large-scale commercial CCS project, designed to capture and store 430,000 tons per year of biogenic CO2. We won a competitive government tender for a 20-year subsidy, and combine it with the largest permanent carbon removal contract in the voluntary markets. And we are on track with this project. The absorbers, desorbers, and direct contact coolers have been installed earlier this year. And I can also perhaps show you a little picture by doing this trick. Yeah, I think it works. So in the back, you see our construction going on. So if I point like this, has been installed very much this year. Here we have, it's on the other side, we have the storage, the in-between storage for the CO2. So very much this project is on track. And in addition to the capture of the bioenergy plants, we also look into CO2 transport, and we also look into CO2 storage. But more on that perhaps later. But that the rationale of why we do CCS.
Great, thank you, Marcus. Can I just ask you, I mean, you're farther than others. You have taken FID. What were the deciding factors for you to take FIDs? I'm sure I mean, a lot of companies want to do what you do, but what was an enabling, maybe was there policy or something enabling also mechanism that helped you actually to take that still very crucial next step to an FID?
Yeah. So in addition to the strategic rationale that I just explained, the sort of going from carbon neutral to carbon negative, and also using bioenergy as a weather independent CO2 neutral or CO2 negative power source. What was extremely helpful was the Danish government and their ambition on CCS. They have in 2022, the Danish government launched a competitive CCS tender for a state subsidy. I think it's a public figure that around 8 billion Danish kroner, so a bit more than 1 billion euros, were in that tender. I cannot disclose the exact number, but the public figure is that what the Danish government had made available. That was really a game changer. So what is really crucial is also to have member states, to have governments take up this initiative and put some money on the table, if you will.
Mhm.
But it can't be governments alone. We also relied on the voluntary carbon market and on a private deal with Microsoft for who is buying carbon removal credits. So we think this ability to stack, combine the two is very important, and is also what enabled us to take a final investment decision. So governments play an important role in getting the first projects off the ground, and that should be the focus, getting the first project off the ground. But what we also need is flexibility to stack revenues.
Thank you. Very interesting, and indeed also a different point of view than Norsk Hydro has. I'm just wondering, Cody, you're following a few projects across Europe as well, and is there any further hurdles and barriers or also enables that you have seen which are important for CCS projects in Europe that we have not discussed yet?
Yeah, thanks, Selena. I think maybe just to curse this with to talk a little bit about like why do we need to have these CCS projects? I mean, even as Marcus alluded to, we import a lot of our hydrocarbons, and there are so many competing places for the demand for clean electricity right now, and we're seeing these data centers pop up, which are sucking demand as well. And we have to think about it from a cost competitive point of view. So if we can cost competitively do CCS on an industrial installation, rather than electrifying that process, if it's cost competitive to do so, then I think we should, because I think we should try and make sure that our, electrification is going to the most efficient places, and where it makes the most sense. The barriers right now that I see in making a reality so that every industry that doesn't need CCS, it's up to them at the end of the day to make that decision based upon their knowledge of their industrial process and the market dynamics. But what the barriers are at the moment is that we really do not see the ETS price yet driving investment decisions in CCS, because it's simply not high enough at the moment to, make that avoided cost make sense to do CCS in many sectors. And in this mid and near term, what we need to do is we need to de-risk these investments, and we need to cover at least that gap between the ETS price and industry as costs for doing CCS. And then in a lot of member states, we see that there are moves to make this a reality. But I do think that there are different stages by which different countries are at, but then, by what industries can really do. Because if you don't have a regulatory framework to transport CO2, to make CCS legal in your country, well, then you can't move on to the next stage, which is actually putting in place the de-risking measures and the financing and funding measures that actually make the projects bankable. And so that's really what we need to start seeing. We need a coordinated approach to this. Right now, we have the Innovation Fund, which is funding many CCS projects throughout Europe. But what we really do need now, with the Industrial Decarbonisation Bank, for example, is looking at how do we deploy these technologies beyond first of a kind. And I think that that is really something that needs to be looked at holistically throughout Europe. We can't just have a patchwork of projects here and there. We need to think about how do we create this market for CO2 that has a large infrastructure which is running efficiently. And I think those are some of the main barriers we need to start working on within the framework of the Clean Industrial Deal if we want projects to start moving in time, because we are running out of time. 5 to 10 years of, ambitiously to say a project will get developed from inception to construction. So we do need these barriers to come down relatively quickly.
Thank you, Cody. And I think you just mentioned a clean industry deal. A lot of the industry is really looking towards that in terms of having the support to achieve that. Stephanie, I know you're working on this. Also, just to mention, Mario Draghi actually, and I think we all in the community were really much looking towards that report. He recognized that in order to really make our hard-to-abate industry more competitive, and decarbonize, we really need both electrification and doubling down on decarbonization. You're currently working also on the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. Can you share a bit more what you're planning specifically in the CID, under the CID framework, also to address some of those challenges that the other panelists have just mentioned in regards to CCS, but also electrification?
Yes, thanks, Selina. I think, a lot of what Cody said, again, is very valid, but I would like to stress one thing, because we have already a comprehensive strategy for industrial carbon management. I cannot underline that often enough. That strategy is from February 2024. We presented it together with our analysis on the 2040 target that is under preparation now. But I think the Clean Industrial Deal is, of course, an important building block. But when it comes to CCS, and when it comes to really supporting full value chain CCS projects, there are other things out there, and actually much more concrete things, not to mention the Net Zero Industry Act, with the legal obligation to provide by 2030 50 million tons of CO2 injection capacity, which is a legal obligation. We recently presented the delegated regulation plus actually the decision that identifies the obligated entities. So there are these things happening. We are also working on the CO2 investment atlas together with the geo surveys. So I mean, I very much agree on the objective, but I think there are many activities already up and running. They may not yet have shown results, but it's also because it's complex. We also have to work with different layers, different players, including the member states. So that will take a little while, but I think it is fair to say that things are moving. There are also member states reconsidering, banning CO2 storage on their territory. So I would not. I would warn a bit throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think we really need to, all hands on deck now to working towards that direction. And when it comes to the Clean Industrial Deal, of course, the Industrial Accelerator Act is not the only deliverable there. My team specifically is more working on the Industrial Decarbonisation Bank that is going to be presented as part of the ETS review. But the Industrial Accelerator Act, or Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, will introduce resilience and sustainability criteria to foster, in particular, clean energy supply for energy-intensive sectors. And we are also working, and it's another team in DG Klima, but DG Klima together with DG Grow inside the Commission, we're working on a voluntary label on the carbon intensity of industrial products, in particular steel. So that is where what was said earlier on, lead markets is actually really crucial also under the Clean Industrial Deal, that we indeed need to find those who will in the end buy those low carbon products, and create those markets as well. I think it also joins very much what was said, I think it was Marcus, on, we need to build a business case. And that is the underlying realization of the Clean Industrial Deal, that actually from a technological point of view, we almost know what needs to be done or what can be done, but we need to build the business case for these technologies. And the innovation fund is there to help. It's to get through the valley of death of many projects. So bringing, not focusing on research, but really bringing the promising projects to the market. A lot more needs to happen to build a business case. We all know that. We also need the appropriate set of skills, for example, but we also need affordable energy. Electrification there, I think, is also not to be underestimated from an energy security point of view, because if you rely on renewable energy, that contributes to energy independence. So I think all of these things obviously need to work in a coherent and consistent way.
Indeed, and I understand it's a complicated challenge. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fill such webinars with it.
If it was easy, we would already have done it.
Exactly. I'm just looking out also before we go, maybe to take some questions from the audience. I'm just wondering also from both Marcus and Christine on the call, if you hear now everything that Stephanie has been mentioning that the Commission is already doing around that, is there anything that you see still missing and would be crucial from your side where you think like, okay, we thought about everything, but not that? Maybe Kristen, if you want to go first.
Yeah, no, I agree very much with Stephanie on building a business case. There are many factors in that business case, and I think there's some really positive developments now going on from the European Commission on having a look at all of those factors. And some of them have been mentioned, but I think first and foremost, the industry in Europe needs affordable energy. So building enough electricity to make it affordable is crucial. And then we need flexibility in the ETS, because for our industry, a high CO2 cost is a cost, and we are competing in a global market. So to us, that increases the risk of carbon leakage. So that's just one thing. Then, of course, for our technology development, as I've said, we have to rely on technological breakthroughs to tackle these emissions. And then the innovation fund and other state support mechanisms to develop CCS technology is very important. Then there needs to be a cost-efficient CCS infrastructure so that we don't have to pay too much for it, because as I said, the only money we can pay is the avoided ETS cost, really. But finally, another way to finance it is to create markets where customers are willing to pay for our low carbon products. And I really put my hopes there on the Clean Industrial Deal. So lots of parts of that addition to make that business case.
Thank you so much. Marcus?
Yeah, no, I agree on the business case. That I think what Christine you mentioned, it's good that the business case is more in the focus now, and also enabling these investments, making sure they can happen. Also, very much good work that is currently being done, has been done, Stephanie, by you and your team and the wider services at the Commission. I think the last 5 years, a lot of very good initiatives, very smart initiatives were put on the table, and the continuation of this under the Clean Industrial Deal is crucial. Industrial Decarbonisation Bank, very warmly welcome. We will see and hope if we get the 100 billion as in the communication, but definitely that's something that is welcome. Also, the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, I think a very needed tool. Perhaps one suggestion, something I haven't heard yet, to you, Stephanie, on the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. So the first, I think you call it pillar or bucket. I think there's 3 of them according to the call for evidence. And the first one deals with permitting. And the second one is more related to clusters, and then the third one is lead markets. On that first one related to permitting, I think it would be very valuable if that includes, of course, decarbonization at EII sites, an electric arc furnace, for example. But what shouldn't be forgotten is carbon capture equipment at industrial sites, but perhaps also at sites that are a bit outside of the scope of EII. So if we look at, for example, bioenergy, currently in our permitting process with our with the project that I've shown before. You know, it's a very new technology. There's new hurdles that you have. There's new challenges on the permitting process. This is really something that that takes up time, that takes up resources. And if the provisions that are foreseen for EIIs and their decarbonization can also be expanded for CO2 infrastructure more generally, and for carbon capture infrastructure, also if it is at the bioenergy, for example, or power plant, or at a direct air capture facility, that would be extremely useful. So have that permitting provision on the first pillar of EDA also apply to CO2 infrastructure and to carbon capture and storage equipment at power plants.
Thanks so much, Marcus. I'm just wondering, Stephanie, do you want to react? Otherwise, I would go to Q&A from the audience.
No, just very briefly, because I think Marcus pointed to it, and it's a good reminder for me. There is actually a public consultation ongoing on the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. It's open until the 9th of July. It has been opened in April. So anybody who wants to contribute to that public consultation is very welcome to do so in that sense. So all what you have said, very helpful if you submit this in writing, of course, to the Commission.
Thank you. Of course, I think many of the attendees and also panelists will do that. I see we have 15 minutes left, and there has been a few questions that I think are interesting for us to discuss. One of them is actually regarding also the electricity demand for CCS. Maybe Kristen, you can answer that. So I know that it's CCS intensive. Maybe you can explain, electricity intensive. Maybe you can explain that further. And the question actually that was asked also is, how do we plan to incorporate the electricity demand for CCS in existing power requirements? How do you deal with that? Kristen?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I can only answer for my own company and my own type of industry. And for us, CCS, so installing CCS equipment will be electricity intensive. It's early days for us. As I said, we are developing the technology, but what we have estimated is that for our 6 smelters, which comprise 40% of aluminium production in Europe, approximately, we will need up to 5 terawatt hours of electricity, and that should be renewable electricity. And 5 terawatt hours is the same as 1 million households in Germany. So it's a huge electricity demand. So when someone here earlier said something about electrification versus CCS, it's almost like CCS is electrification. Just to complicate things further. So anything that can make us have more renewable energy in Europe fast will be required to decarbonize, whether it's with CCS or electrification directly.
Thank you so much. Maybe just another question, and there has been a few questions for you, Stephanie, regarding that decarbonization bank. So one of them was that it will be a fixed premium. It's a question, will it be similar like the reversed auctioning process that has been used in Sweden for BECCS? Another question was more, it's also, will geothermal energy be included? Can you give us a bit more insight in the Industrial Decarbonization Bank?
So, yeah, first of all, I think it's important to distinguish. So there's on the one hand the Industrial Decarbonization Bank that will be proposed next year as part of the ETS revision. However, what these questions relate to is the fixed premium auction that we are launching at the end of this year as a pilot or precursor, so to say, for the Industrial Decarbonization Bank. And that will be a fixed premium auction again, because, well, there are other models out there, but there's also only that much that you can do in a relatively short amount of time in terms of organizing calls and so on. So On the details, because now, going into the details of what is eligible, what is not eligible, I would rather not want to do that. But we have had an extensive stakeholder consultation already. The recording of that is available online on our website, so everybody is invited to watch that video. Or also, there's a dedicated website actually on this auction, so with more information being available. The purpose is really, I mean, we know, and Marcus also confirmed it, that indeed electrification is one way for a number of applications, and installing industrial heat pumps, can have quite some benefits. But at the same time, for the respective, or the adoption of the respective technologies is still below its potential, and that is because there are cost gaps, and those cost gaps we can actually cover with such an auction. We have the experience from the European Hydrogen Bank, so it's really that we would then pay this green premium, so to say. And it's cost gaps compared, of course, to the fossil fuel based technologies. And there's also a perception of long payback periods out there, which the auction can then probably also address. And that is the whole gist of it. But as I said, a lot of information is already available on our website. And the draft terms and conditions will also very soon be published, so that then there is also a possibility to get acquainted with those draft terms and conditions, while the final terms and conditions will then only be available at the end of the year. But at least, it gives an idea as to what to expect once it's out there.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those additional insights and clarification specifically. I'm just looking at if there is there's one more question which I think is really interesting, and maybe more a summarizing question. Maybe Cody, you can respond to that. In terms of, if you need to summarize it now, more like what kind of equipment, technologies, and competencies are we actually lacking in Europe to grow furthest the CCS development? I think we already talked about some points, but can you maybe elaborate a bit more with also that insight that you have from the research perspective?
Sure. I mean, we've heard from the aluminum industry here today, which is that there's obviously a need to develop CCS technologies that are able to deal with low concentrations of CO2 in the flue gas. We also know that from the modeling that we will need to deploy quite a bit of carbon removals in the future as well to deal with the emissions by which we cannot deal with electrification, energy efficiency, CCS, and everything else. So we will need to start working on, say, technologies like direct air capture, which still need a lot of work to lower the cost, increase the efficiencies as much as we can. And we're also learning now by way of deploying, BECCS and other technologies that can also deliver carbon removals, just how to optimize these processes. I'm sure Marcus is very happy that his project will be soon launching, and we are too. But this is how we learn things, and this is how we optimize these processes. Through the Innovation Fund as well, in the cement sector, we're starting to see that there are new technologies coming forward, rather not new, but more innovative, such as oxy-fuel combustion. But the question is, what are we lacking? And I think that we know how to do CCS. We've done CCS. The technology is decades old. I think in the United States, over 1 billion tons of CO2 has been injected into the subsurface now, and that's a recent milestone that was crossed. So we do know how to do this. The question really is, and Stephanie mentioned this as well, that we do have a lot of upskilling in terms of jobs and competencies to get people into the place where they're able to work in this industry. CCS is going to create a lot of jobs. The green transition is going to create a lot of jobs, but these value chains require really skilled people behind them. And I'm not sure if the question, refers to competencies in terms of a national competencies, but it's one thing we do observe when we're looking at working in specific member states which maybe don't have the same experience in, working with the subsurface, or have as much capacity or resources within their civil services to implement these legislation and put in place the funding and regulatory aspects to make CCS happen in their countries. And I think that's an opportunity really for across European collaboration in this space, as well as perhaps support from some of our institutions, including the European Commission, to help these countries to really get going on kind of bringing down some of these barriers for the continent. I know that there is great work already going on there, and I suppose to summarize on one last point is certainly to say that so much has happened and so much is happening in this space that I'm certainly hopeful that we will be able to deploy a lot. And now this Industrial Decarbonisation Bank and the IDAA are the next steps really in just catalyzing the work that the Commission has started with the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, and really just trying to seize upon this momentum now.
Thank you so much, Cody. And I think with that answer, we're already kind of coming to the end of this hour of our webinar. I mean, if I look back at reflect back over our conversation, I take three things from it. On the one side, I think what became apparent, there is not one formula. On the other side, we really need to build a business case for both CCS deployment, but also electrification. And there are cost gaps that we're still having, also regulatory gaps that we need to fill. I'm just also looking towards my panelists here, and I'd like to also hear from their side. What is the one thing that you will now take home from that conversation? And maybe we can start with Stephanie. Listening to that conversation now, what is the one thing that you will remember from it?
Well, I'm actually always grateful that we're having these conversations because we seem to converge on many things. I mean, I obviously do not agree with everything I've said. I know, Christine, Marcus, and Cody probably also do not agree with everything that I have said, but that comes with the different roles we have, in this system. But largely, we're really converging on yes, we need to do this. We want to do this. We need to build the business case for these solutions, but also that it's actually possible to do it. So I'm always heartened by these discussions, and as long as we keep on discussing and exchanging, I'm also very confident that we will build a good, frame for making this happen.
Thank you. That's why we're also doing this webinar. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Kristen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I have to say, if I'm going to go back to my colleagues now, I will be quite heartened that there is a growing understanding of the need for a business case and for the many different parts of the business case to add up for a company like ours to be able to compete in a global market while also decarbonizing. So this growing understanding is really something that I take to heart. And I guess one point that I wish I had made clearer is the sort of last part of the EDA framework and going on into the lead markets. But we will definitely be submitting our position to the consultation. So thank you.
Thank you. Marcus?
Yeah, no, it was a very good conversation with different perspectives, but I agree we converge, and I think, yeah, what is important now, we can all agree, is that really we need to get going. We need to start the project. We have the right frameworks in place, largely some few tweaks here and there, especially on the business case. But let's overcome these barriers. Let's also have regulations that and support that we enable this, as we've already do have in some member states, such as Denmark. And then yeah, we can really go. So let's go with CCS. Yes, yes, yes.
That's a good slogan. Cody, do you want to provide your input, your takeaway?
Yeah, just quickly to say thanks again to everyone for this great discussion. I think we're all, like it's been said already, there's a lot of alignment on that Europe needs to decarbonize. which is great. And that's one thing that makes Europe a great place to invest for climate solutions, because we have this political trajectory in these times of uncertainty in other markets. And what we really need to do is make sure that we don't let this opportunity go. We should be looking to commercialize the technologies that we innovate on, and not have a repeat of, say, the solar industry or something like that, where we kind of give this over to other market players. We currently lead in carbon capture globally, according to the Draghi report. So let's not let this opportunity go.
Thank you so much, Cody, and a really good closure statement. And on this note, also thank you so much to all the panelists for joining in and providing your insights. I also just want to thank for everybody who has watched this webinar. It was a pleasure to co-organize that from CCS Europe side with Cleaner Task Force. And now I'm just wishing you a great rest of the day, and enjoy also the rest of the Sustainable Energy Days event. And yeah, thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.